What's going on, everyone? It's Bruce Poinsett back for another video. And in installment number 2 of Practical Advice Story Time, today we're going to be talking about long money in journalism. And what do I mean by long money? I mean sustainable money. It's something, as opposed to thinking about the right now, thinking more about your career and being able to build up something. So, first off, let's talk about why this is important. And it's because, one, the journalism industry in itself is in a major state of flux. So it's not that the demand for news stories or storytelling in itself is less. In fact, I'd argue it's more. And, with the pandemic, endless wars, the economy, people want news, people want stories. However, part of the problem is that traditional media doesn't really know how to, I guess, not monetize, but how to sustainably monetize this right now, which is for a number of reasons. One, because of the way we consume information has changed and diversified. So you have a lot of people in traditional outlets who are trying to hang on to the old models, and it's a struggle. But also, there's just more media. There are more outlets, there are more independent journalists, there are more people providing stories and providing the news and providing information. So things are just spread out, and it's, for lack of better analogies, we're in the wild, wild west right now. And as such, if you're going into journalism, it's important to think about it not just from, you can't think about it as if you're going into journalism in 1980 anymore. You have to think for 2020. So as opposed to focusing in on the industry itself, sometimes it's good to focus in on the lessons that you can take from the industry, whether you want to build a career as a journalist, or maybe you want to take these skills somewhere else, which brings us back to long money, which is sustainable money. And, again, sustainable money and skills and connections that can be tools for success. So before we go any further, I want to, one, acknowledge my privilege in this discussion, because when I was working as a journalist and, you know, just when I came out of college, I stayed with my parents until, the end of the Obamacare years, which was, you know, you can stay on your parents' health insurance to 26, right? So I know a lot of people don't have that, not to mention just my own background coming up in a place like, a wealthy suburb like Lake Oswego, Oregon. I had connections and things that, I guess connections to resources that other people didn't have that definitely helped me go through. So I do not want to frame this as if it is something that, everyone can do no matter your situation. I want to be very transparent about that. But with that said, when I was a journalist, specifically or full time, I guess, I spent 2 years at a historically Black newspaper, The Scanner, and then I've worked in, a lot of journalism related fields since, and it's been about a decade now. But one of the important things I learned is you got to pay attention to all the relevant metrics. There are certain metrics, we're told we need to obviously, like, what's our income? What are the views? You know, things like that. But you have to look at things in a more holistic view. Like, what, you know, what is important to you? What is important to the bigger picture? So one of the things I picked up very early on is that there are two long-term benefits, everything else aside, when you get into journalism. First is you get paid to learn about people, industries, issues, all these things. Like, it is on the job training. So when you get paid to ask people questions, It's like you're going in learning how things work. If, I want to interview someone about, if I want to interview an insurance agent, I'm going in peppering that person with questions about the industry and trying to learn as much as I can so I can tell a good story, but also, so I understand what I'm talking about, so I'm not misinforming people. And you also, when you're talking with people, you get to understand like why they're talking to you. You're a journalist. There's a natural level of skepticism, obviously. Like people think, we may be cordial, but what if I just turn around and write some smear piece about you? I think people are a little more fearful of that than they should be, just reflexively, but it's real. So when you're talking with people, you see what, why this story or why this coverage, what does it mean to them? What does it mean to their interest? And you get to understand them better. You get to understand industries better. And also, when you do this, you make a lot of connections and a lot of broad connections. So I was working at a Black newspaper. I was covering arts. I was covering business. I was covering activism. I was covering education, politics. And you meet people. You meet the people that work under them. You have a lot of communications back and forth with someone's assistant, or you have communications with the person themselves. Sometimes you get tips from people and you build relationships. And, maybe you're not a journalist forever. Maybe you are. These people can inform your stories going forward, or maybe they inform your next career move. As long as you're willing to be, as long as you're willing to be genuine, you're willing to, take some time, not just to, if you say, we have a 10-minute interview and you have the person call in, do the interview and click off, or do you take the time and have the pre-interview conversation? Maybe the conversation before the day even happens. Do you take time? Do you have, if it's not live, do you have a long interview? Do you talk for an hour maybe with a person knowing that maybe only 5 minutes of this conversation is going to be your story? Like, it may seem like you're wasting time, but it's an opportunity again to build relationships, learn how things work, and then maybe plant the seeds for a move down the line. So I'll give you an example. Being in journalism was definitely what helped jumpstart my interest in organizing. I had no interest in, being a community activist or anything like that, but I had to meet a lot of organizers. I had to cover a lot of uh, community actions, events, programs, and you get a feel for what's happening. You get a feel for the different people involved, the different organizations, some of the the issues underlying everything, and you see what works, you see what doesn't work. So let me give you an example of someone who I think has done this in a way that really works. And, I'm lucky now, I can say to call her a comrade and a friend, but I'm talking about Walida Amarisha. Like, she's, known around Oregon for her, why are there so few Black people in Oregon, sort of Black History Project. But, she's also an author, you know, organizer, does, teaches different classes on hip hop or the history of hip hop, prison abolition, you know, science fiction or and organizing and activism through a sci-fi lens. Like it's all over the place, right? I first met her actually doing a story for the Scanner. You see here back in 2012 for the group Decolonize PDX. And it's especially it's pertinent now because now this when I talk of defund prisons and abolish the police are mainstream conversations to some degree. Back when I first met her and I met this organization, you know that was new to me. That blew my mind. And now to watch that work evolve says a lot in itself. But I digress. you know Again, in Oregon, Walida is largely known for her Black history presentation, but it's the broadness of the stuff she does. It's the broadness of covering, again, hip hop history, prison abolition, you know, writing, being a poet, writing sci-fi, and, just being a genuine person, being very personable, being willing to talk with you, being willing to, give advice and connect people. And also the fact that, she tours, I mean, I'll say tours, because like she's done stuff with Oregon Humanities and other programs, but her presentations are all throughout the state. So yeah, we may think of Portland or Salem or some of these other places, or Eugene, but she's out in Klamath Falls, she's out in, Astoria, Bend, Pendleton, you know, whatever little podunk town you can think of, like she's out there. And, the places where you think any talk about Black liberation would not be well received, she's there and people love it. I mean, obviously some people don't love it, but what, as someone who, I think should know better, growing up as a Black person in a very isolated space in a place literally called Lake No Negro, like she has done this job of finding, of going out and seeing those of us who grew up like me, who grew up in other places with, like me, with less resources, but we're desperately looking for a voice like this, for content like this, to see, I mean, literally, to see a Black woman, an unapologetically Black woman with an Angela Davis afro, talking not just about history, but the work people are doing right now and how you can get involved. Like, that speaks to people, that motivates people. And, over these years, because again, I first met her in 2012, and, I've gotten to obviously talk with her, interview her for projects, but also interview the people who come to these presentations, interview the people who, work with her. So, because my perception can be one thing, what I see in the audience can be one thing, but what do people say? Well, how do people feel? And, in all these ways, you see, oh, it's that personable approach, it's that unapologetic approach that connects with people. Oh, it's filling in this gap that a bunch of people didn't even know they needed, whether it was history or just an attitude, just visual, sometimes just seeing a person that you can relate to, someone who captures these feelings that you didn't have words for, and being able to go from place to place and activate people or inspire people who weren't getting spoken to before. Like, that's powerful. And again, that's just one of the many examples I've picked up, because the other part about that is it's not just doing the work and being good at it, but it's understanding your value and understanding that, part of it is the demand for this, and then understanding that, what, these are because people want this, and because there's so many areas that are going untapped, there's money for this. You can have a career doing the right thing and doing it ethically. Like, as crazy as it sounds, excuse me, ableist slur there, but as, absurd as it sounds, it can be done. So, how have I taken lessons like that into my approach? Well, first is just being authentic. You know, I can be me. Obviously, there's certain problematic things that we all do that we have to work on. But in terms of, you know, not being afraid of my own voice, but instead being able to, lean into it. I don't sound like everyone else, and that's fine. I don't fit into necessarily the quote unquote what, people think a Black person should sound like or look like all the time. But that's fine, because a lot of the people I'm talking to have that same story. So why not lean into it and try and model some confidence in it? You know, understanding that I'm different, that's an asset. Like, I cut through because I'm different. So it doesn't just blend in with the other sounds. When you hear me, it sounds different. or the way I come out of it sounds different. And maybe, you know, if it's different enough, it's memorable. But then also another thing that I take from that, again, is, and I'll put it in quotes, touring, going around. Like, there's obviously the main, you know, home base of Portland, the metro area, you know, growing in Beaverton now, growing out in Gresham and East County now. But go out to these places. There are so many, you know, people who are looking for this, like as a Black person, but also other underrepresented groups who, let's keep it real, like, are looking to some of the Black people in the vanguard of some of this work, just as we're looking to other people in other communities who are, you know, the vanguards of justice work. And being able to, you know, understand that, find places like, oh, people aren't being spoken to, but they need, or not need, but they want to hear this, and making those connections. Because especially being isolated in these places, like, we gotta we gotta stick together. We gotta have some outside support. We have to, you know, we have to have reinforcements. And it builds goodwill, it builds connections, it builds, you know, in the most cynical business sense, for, again, that long money, it builds an audience. Because you come to these places where other people aren't coming, they're gonna want you back, and they're gonna tell their friends. So make an impression by serving the needs. And then lastly, with the product itself, you know, you get to use all this info at your disposal to inform your product. You get to be informed by people's needs in different places, people's stories. You get to be informed by just the different atmospheres and what changes and what stays the same from place to place where you go. All of this helps make your product better. It helps make, you know, if you're a storyteller, it helps make you a better storyteller. Helps make you a better, you know, communicator with people. It gives more depth to the stories you tell. It gives something that people can take away, so they're not just entertained, but they really do learn something. And just the more you do this, the more time, like, accumulates, whether it's years, decades, you become better and better. And no matter, again, if you're a professional storyteller or you're just taking these skills into life in general, it can make you successful, sustainable, and perhaps most importantly, you're always able to speak to the things that are in demand, whether the industry itself, you know, looks like it currently does, or whether journalism, writing, storytelling is completely different. So again, take these lessons. If you're trying to be a journalist, if you're trying to work in PR, if you're trying to work, you know, trying to be a satirist, I'm not sure how much money people are making as full-time satirists, but, you know, if you want to work in these journalism related fields, or if you just want to take this and think about how you can be better professionally in general, use these lessons, use these ideas, use your ability to learn and listen and pick up things, your ability to, again, be always thinking about broadening your audience. All of these things are at your advantage. And with that, we conclude today's story time. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.